The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the private terminal at London's Heathrow Airport. Officer Marcus Webb stood at his usual post, his crisp uniform perfectly pressed, his posture rigid. After 15 years of service in the Royal Protection Unit, he had seen countless dignitaries pass through these exclusive corridors. But today something felt different. His instincts, honed by years of experience, whispered that something unusual was about to happen. Camilla arrived at the terminal with her usual entourage of 3 assistants and 2 security personnel. She wore an elegant cream-colored coat and carried a designer handbag that probably cost more than Marcus earned in 6 months. Her face showed signs of stress, unusual for someone who typically maintained perfect composure in public. She kept glancing at her watch and seemed eager to board the private jet waiting on the tarmac. Marcus had processed her departures dozens of times before. The routine was always the same: a polite greeting, quick verification of documents, and a respectful nod as she passed through. But today, as she approached the security checkpoint, he noticed her hand trembling slightly as she placed her luggage on the conveyor belt. Her assistants exchanged worried glances, and one of them stepped forward as if to intervene. The security scanner beeped. It was a sound Marcus had heard thousands of times, usually indicating nothing more than a forgotten phone or metal jewelry. But the pattern was different this time, more insistent. The screen showed an unusual density in the main compartment of Camilla's carry-on bag. Protocol demanded investigation regardless of who owned the luggage. Marcus cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I need to conduct a manual inspection of your bag." Camilla's face went pale. Her lead assistant, a stern woman named Margaret, immediately protested. "Officer, this is highly irregular. Do you understand who you're dealing with? We're running late for an important diplomatic function in Paris." Marcus remained calm, his training taking over. "I understand completely, ma'am. However, security protocols apply to everyone without exception. It will only take a moment." He reached for the bag and Camilla instinctively pulled it back, clutching it against her chest. The reaction was telling. In all his years of service, he had never seen her so protective of her belongings. The tension in the terminal became thick enough to cut. Camilla's security team moved closer, their hands hovering near their concealed weapons. Marcus's own backup team sensed the escalating situation and quietly positioned themselves nearby. What should have been a routine procedure had suddenly become a potential international incident. Camilla finally released her grip on the bag, but her eyes pleaded with Marcus. "Please," she whispered, barely audible. "You don't understand what you're doing." Marcus unzipped the bag slowly, aware that every person in the terminal was watching his movements. Inside, he saw the usual items: a leather wallet, designer sunglasses, a small makeup case, tissues, and breath mints. Nothing remarkable. But his trained fingers detected something underneath the silk lining at the bottom of the bag. There was a hidden compartment, cleverly disguised to blend with the bag's interior structure. He looked up at Camilla, whose face had drained of all color. Perspiration beaded on her forehead despite the cool air conditioning. Margaret stepped forward again, her voice sharp and commanding. "Officer Webb, I must insist you stop this inspection immediately. I will be filing a formal complaint with your superiors." Marcus ignored the threat. He had faced intimidation before, and his duty was clear. His fingers found the tiny clasp that released the hidden compartment. As it opened, he pulled out a bundle wrapped in black velvet cloth. The weight and feel of it suggested something valuable, possibly jewelry. But when he unwrapped it carefully, what he found inside made his breath catch in his throat. It was a small, leather-bound journal, worn and ancient-looking, with a golden clasp. Beside it lay a collection of old photographs yellowed with age, and what appeared to be official documents bearing royal seals. But it was the small USB drive that concerned him most. In today's world, information could be more dangerous than any weapon. Camilla's voice cracked as she spoke. "Marcus, please. You have no idea what you're holding. Some secrets are kept hidden for very good reasons." Marcus had been trained to expect drugs, weapons, or smuggled items. He had not been prepared for historical documents and mysterious photographs. He picked up one of the photos carefully, his eyes widening as he recognized the faces in it. The image showed people who should never have been in the same place together. From a time period that didn't match official historical records, the head of airport security, Director Patricia Holmes, emerged from her office. Having been alerted to the unusual situation, she was a no-nonsense woman who had worked in security for 30 years and had handled sensitive situations involving royalty before. She approached the checkpoint quickly, assessed the scene, and then looked at what Marcus had discovered. Patricia's expression changed from professional concern to genuine shock. She picked up one of the documents, studied it briefly, and then looked at Camilla with a mixture of confusion and alarm. "Ma'am, I think we need to move this conversation somewhere more private." Immediately, Camilla nodded, relief and fear mixing on her face. She understood that Marcus had just opened a door that had been carefully sealed for decades. Whatever was in that bag had the potential to change. Everything people thought they knew about the royal family's history. Marcus carefully gathered all the items, placed them back in the velvet cloth, followed Patricia and Camilla toward a secure conference room away from the public areas of the terminal. Camilla's assistants tried to follow, but Patricia raised her hand firmly. "Only essential personnel. This is now a matter of national security." As they walked down the corridor, Marcus's mind raced with questions. What could possibly be in those documents that would cause such a dramatic reaction? Why would someone of Camilla's position risk smuggling historical materials out of the country? And most importantly, what would happen now that he had discovered them? Inside the conference room, Camilla sat down heavily, her usual regal bearing completely abandoned. She looked at Marcus with tired eyes and said something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Officer Webb, you've just stumbled upon a truth that 3 generations have worked to keep hidden. What you do in the next few minutes will affect not just me, but the entire foundation of the monarchy." Patricia closed the door and activated the room's security protocols, ensuring complete privacy. She placed the bag's contents on the table between them. The 3 of them stared at the objects that had just transformed a routine security check into a potential constitutional crisis. The small USB drive sat there innocently. But Marcus knew it contained something powerful enough to make a royal risk everything to remove it. From the country, Marcus had started his shift that morning thinking it would be another ordinary day. He had kissed his wife goodbye, reminded his daughter to study for her exams, and driven to work listening to the radio. Now, he sat in a locked room with contents that could potentially rewrite history, and he had to decide what to do next. His training told him to follow protocol and report everything through official channels. But the look in Camilla's eyes told him that doing so might unleash consequences he couldn't begin to imagine. The silence in the room stretched on, heavy with unspoken implications. Finally, Patricia spoke, her voice measured and careful. "Perhaps, Your Highness, you should explain exactly what we're looking at here." Camilla took a deep breath and reached for the leather journal. Her fingers trembled as she opened it to a page marked with a faded ribbon. The handwriting inside was elegant but hurried, as if the writer had been recording something urgently. Marcus leaned forward slightly, trying to see the words, but Camilla closed it again before he could read anything. She looked directly at Patricia first, then at Marcus. "What I'm about to tell you is known by only 5 people in the entire world. After today, there will be 7. I need your word, both of you, that what you hear in this room stays completely confidential until I give you permission to speak of it." Patricia exchanged a glance with Marcus. As security professionals, they couldn't promise complete silence if national security was at risk. Patricia voiced this concern carefully. "Your Highness, now we can't make that promise if what you're about to reveal poses a threat to the country or the crown." Camilla smiled sadly. "It poses no threat to the country, but it does pose a significant threat to the carefully constructed narrative that has been maintained since 1953. This journal belonged to my grandmother-in-law. The photographs you see here were taken during a period of her life that has been completely erased from official records." Marcus picked up one of the photographs again, studying it more carefully. It showed a young woman who looked remarkably like the late queen in her youth. But she was standing with a man Marcus didn't recognize. They were in front of what appeared to be a small cottage, and both were smiling with genuine warmth. The woman's hand rested on her pregnant belly. Camilla noticed Marcus studying the photo. That picture was taken in Scotland in 1952. The man standing beside her, is Thomas Whitmore, a decorated war hero who saved her life during a bombing raid in 1941. They fell deeply in love. But he was a commoner with no title, no wealth, and no political connections. Such a match was absolutely impossible for someone in her position. Patricia's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" Camilla nodded slowly. "The child she's carrying in that photograph is the current king. His biological father was Thomas Whitmore, not the man history records as his father. The official father was already seriously ill at that time and agreed to claim the child as his own to protect the monarchy. It was a secret arrangement made by the highest levels of government and the royal family." Marcus felt his world shifting. He had grown up believing in the clear, documented lineage of the royal family. The idea that such a fundamental deception had been maintained for over 70 years seemed impossible. Yet the evidence sat right in front of him. The desperation in Camilla's voice suggested she was telling the truth. Camilla continued, her voice gaining strength as she explained. "Thomas and the Queen were forced apart, but they exchanged letters secretly for years. This journal contains those letters, along with her private thoughts about the arrangement. Thomas eventually moved to Canada, married someone else, and lived a quiet life. He died 10 years ago, never having publicly revealed what he knew. But before he died, he sent this journal back to someone who delivered it to me 3 months ago." Patricia leaned back in her chair, processing the magnitude of what she was hearing. "Why are you trying to take these materials out of the country now? Why not simply destroy them if they're so dangerous?" Camilla's expression hardened. "Because destroying them would be wrong. This is history, the truth of what really happened. My mother-in-law wanted this story preserved, but she also knew it couldn't be revealed during her lifetime or that of her son. She left instructions that after both of them had passed, the truth should be given to a trusted historian who could eventually tell the story properly." She picked up the USB drive and held it up. "This contains digitized versions of everything in this bag, plus additional documentation and DNA test results that prove the connection. I was taking these materials to Dr. Helena Ashworth, historian at the Sorbonne who specializes in 20th century British history. She has agreed to keep them sealed for another 15 years, but then to write a comprehensive, factual account of what really happened." Marcus's mind was spinning with implications. But why does it matter now? The current king has reigned for years. The succession is stable. Why risk everything by revealing this information at all? Camilla stood and walked to the window, looking out at the planes on the tarmac. "Because truth matters, Marcus. History matters. The Queen lived her entire life carrying this secret. Loving a man she could never acknowledge, raising a son who never knew his real father. Thomas Whitmore was a genuine hero who saved countless lives during the war. But he's been erased from history because his greatest act of love had to remain hidden." She turned back to face them, and tears glistened in her eyes. "More than that, there are rumors circulating in certain circles. Journalists are investigating. Some of Thomas's relatives in Canada have started asking questions. If this truth comes out through tabloid speculation and scandal, it will be devastating. But if it's revealed properly through careful historical scholarship, at a time when everyone directly involved has passed on, it can be understood in its proper context." Patricia stood and paced the small conference room. "Your Highness, surely you understand that Marcus and I cannot simply let you walk out of here with these materials. Even if we believe your intentions are honorable, this is potentially explosive information. Our superiors need to be informed." Camilla nodded, apparently having expected this response. "I understand. But I'm asking you to think carefully about who you inform and how you do it. There are people within the establishment who would immediately move to suppress this information permanently. They would cite national interest, stability of the monarchy, protection of institutional dignity. And in doing so, they would ensure that a beautiful, tragic love story and a sacrifice made by extraordinary people would be lost forever." Marcus found himself in an impossible position. His duty was clear: report the discovery through official channels and let his superiors make the decisions. But something about Camilla's story resonated with him. He thought about his own wife, about the sacrifices ordinary people make for love and duty. He wondered what it must have been like for the Queen, maintaining such a monumental secret while living under constant public scrutiny. Patricia seemed to be wrestling with similar thoughts. She picked up the journal and flipped through it carefully, not reading the entries, but observing the genuine age of the paper. The authenticity of the handwriting, the personal nature of the contents. Everything suggested that this was exactly what Camilla claimed it to be. Finally, Patricia spoke. If we're going to make a decision that goes against standard protocol, I need more assurance that this isn't some elaborate deception. I need to understand exactly what's on that USB drive and verify that your story holds up under scrutiny. Camilla reached into her pocket and pulled out a small key. This unlocks an encrypted partition on the drive. Inside, you'll find a letter written by the late Queen herself, recorded in her own handwriting just 2 years before she died. She explains everything, including her wishes for how this information should eventually be revealed. There are also letters from Thomas, photographs with verified dates and locations, and DNA analysis conducted by 3 independent laboratories. She handed the key to Patricia. Take 2 hours. Review everything on that drive. Verify what I've told you. Then make your decision. If you still believe this needs to go through official channels immediately, I won't fight you. But at least you'll be making an informed choice. Marcus looked at his watch. Camilla's flight had been scheduled to depart 30 minutes ago. Her absence would already be noticed. Questions would be asked. They were running out of time to handle this quietly. He voiced this concern, and Patricia nodded in agreement. Camilla had clearly thought this through. Tell anyone who asks that I fell ill suddenly and needed medical attention. My personal physician can provide documentation to support that story if necessary. It will buy us the time we need to review the materials and make a proper decision. Patricia made a quick decision. She pulled out her phone and made several calls, setting the cover story in motion. Camilla's flight was delayed due to a minor technical issue. The royal passenger had taken ill and was receiving attention from medical staff. Everything was under control. The calls were brief and professional, and within minutes, the official story was in place. Marcus was assigned to retrieve a secure laptop from the equipment locker. When he returned, Patricia had already set up additional security measures in the conference room. They would review the contents of the USB drive together, maintaining a clear chain of custody and ensuring that nothing could be accused of being altered or fabricated. As Marcus inserted the USB drive and entered the encryption key, he couldn't help but feel that his life had just become irrevocably complicated. He had joined the Royal Protection Unit because he believed in service, duty, and the importance of the institution he was protecting. Now he was about to learn that the foundation of that institution was built on a secret, so profound that its revelation could shake the very core of British identity. The files began to load on the screen. There were hundreds of documents carefully organized and labeled. Patricia and Marcus exchanged a look that communicated their shared understanding. They were about to spend the next few hours learning truths that would change how they viewed everything. They thought they knew about the royal family. Camilla sat quietly, watching them with an expression of resigned patience. She had carried this burden for months, and now she had passed it, at least temporarily. To people she barely knew, but had to trust completely. The first document Patricia opened was a personal letter written in elegant cursive handwriting. The paper was cream-colored with a subtle watermark, and even through the computer screen, Marcus could tell it was high-quality stationery. Patricia read aloud slowly, her voice steady but filled with emotion. To whoever reads this, I write these words in my 89th year, knowing that I may not have much time left. The secret I have carried for over 60 years weighs heavily on my heart. But I have carried it faithfully for the sake of duty and country. Thomas Whitmore was the love of my life, the father of my son, and a man of such integrity and courage that his sacrifice deserves to be remembered, even if that remembrance must come long after we are all gone. Marcus felt goosebumps rise on his arms as Patricia continued reading. The letter detailed a love story that began during the darkest days of World War II. When a young princess working as a mechanic and driver crossed paths with a soldier who would change her life forever, the Queen described how Thomas had pulled her from a building seconds before it collapsed during an air raid, how they had spent hours trapped in a shelter during subsequent bombings, talking about everything and nothing, finding connection in the midst of chaos. Their relationship had developed secretly over 2 years, meeting in carefully arranged locations, stealing moments away from the constant surveillance that surrounded her life. When she discovered she was pregnant, the situation became impossible. Marriage to Thomas was absolutely out of the question. The government and royal advisors made that abundantly clear. The monarchy was still recovering from the abdication crisis, and another scandal could have destroyed the institution entirely. Patricia clicked through to another document. It was a formal agreement, dated 3 months before the current king's birth. The document outlined an arrangement where the official father, who was already aware of his own terminal illness, would claim the child as his own. In exchange, Thomas would receive a substantial sum of money. She refused, and a guarantee that he would never be persecuted or silenced, which he accepted. The document was signed by multiple witnesses, including 2 members of parliament and a bishop. Marcus stared at the signatures. These were names from history books, people whose integrity was unquestioned. The document bore official seals that would be extremely difficult to forge, especially to the level of detail visible in the high-resolution scans. Everything about the materials suggested authenticity, not fabrication. Camilla spoke quietly from her position by the window. "Keep reading." The next folder contains letters between Thomas and the Queen, written over the course of 40 years. They never stopped loving each other, but they both understood that duty came first. Patricia opened the folder and began reading through the letters chronologically. They painted a picture of 2 people who had made an impossible choice and lived with its consequences every day. Thomas's letters were filled with support and understanding. He never expressed bitterness or regret. Instead, he wrote about his pride in watching his son grow up from afar, his admiration for how the Queen handled her responsibilities, and his acceptance that their sacrifice had been necessary. The Queen's letters revealed a different side of her than the world ever saw. She wrote about the loneliness of her position, the burden of constant scrutiny, the ache of seeing Thomas's features in their son's face and never being able to acknowledge it. She described moments of joy when she received his letters, hidden away where she could read them privately. She mourned when she learned of his marriage to another woman. Even though she understood and accepted that he deserved happiness, Marcus found himself deeply moved by the correspondence. These weren't the words of conspirators or people trying to deceive the nation. These were the private thoughts of 2 individuals who had been forced by circumstances to give up everything for duty. The letters revealed sacrifice, integrity, and a love that endured despite impossible separation. Patricia moved to the DNA analysis folder. The documents were technical but clear. 3 separate laboratories, all internationally recognized and independent, had analyzed samples and reached the same conclusion. The genetic markers confirmed a biological relationship between Thomas Whitmore's descendants and the current king. The probability calculations were overwhelming, leaving no reasonable doubt about paternity. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. "These DNA tests? When were they conducted?" Camilla answered. 2 years ago, after Thomas's grandson approached a lawyer with questions about family history. Thomas had told his children certain things before he died. Not the full story, but enough to raise questions. The grandson wanted answers. Rather than let him pursue this publicly, certain individuals within the royal household arranged for discreet testing. When the results confirmed everything, a decision was made at the highest levels about how to handle the situation. Patricia looked up sharply. "So other people already know about this? How many?" Camilla counted on her fingers. "The king knows." "I know. His private secretary knows. 2 members of the Privy Council were informed because of the constitutional implications. And Thomas's grandson knows, though he signed a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. That's 5 people who had the full picture before you 2 today." Marcus felt a flash of anger. So the king has known for 2 years that his father wasn't who he thought? How did he react? Camilla's expression softened. He was devastated at first. Then he read his mother's letters and Thomas's letters. He saw the photographs, understood the context, learned about the impossible situation they faced. His perspective changed. He came to see Thomas not as a man who created a scandal, but as a hero who sacrificed everything, including acknowledgement of his own son, to protect the monarchy. The king actually wanted to reach out to Thomas's family to somehow honor him quietly, but was advised against it. She walked back to the table and placed her hands on it, looking at both Patricia and Marcus. That's why I'm trying to get these materials to Dr. Ashworth. The king approved this plan. He wants the truth preserved and eventually told, but in a way that respects everyone involved, provides proper historical context, and doesn't turn his mother's memory or Thomas's sacrifice into tabloid fodder. Patricia closed the laptop carefully. She looked at Marcus, and he could see that she was struggling with the same conflict he felt. Everything they had seen supported Camilla's story. The evidence was compelling, the documentation extensive, and the explanation reasonable. But allowing a member of the royal family to leave the country with materials that could fundamentally alter public understanding of the monarchy was a decision with enormous implications. Marcus spoke carefully. What happens if we let you go to Paris with these materials and something goes wrong? What if the materials are stolen? What if Dr. Ashworth decides to publish early? What if another historian gets access and leaks everything? Camilla had clearly considered these scenarios. Dr. Ashworth has built her entire career on integrity and proper historical methodology. She has signed contracts with penalties so severe that violating them would destroy her professionally and financially. The materials will be stored in a university vault with the same security used for priceless manuscripts. Multiple redundant copies exist in other secure locations, so stealing these specific items would accomplish nothing. And if something does leak prematurely, well, perhaps that's fate deciding the timing rather than us. Patricia stood and walked to the corner of the room, pulling out her phone. She made a call, speaking in low tones that Marcus couldn't quite hear. When she returned, her expression was unreadable. I just spoke with someone I trust at MI5. Hypothetically, if information about uncertain royal paternity were to come to light, what would the security implications be? The answer was interesting. Apparently, they've known about this possibility for years and have contingency plans in place. The monarchy has faced worse scandals and survived. The public is more forgiving about historical events than we might expect, especially if the people involved are deceased and the story is presented with proper context. Marcus absorbed this information. So MI5 already knows. Patricia shook her head. Not specifically about this situation. But they've apparently wargamed various scenarios involving royal secrets and historical revelations. Their assessment is that while such revelations would generate significant media attention, they wouldn't pose a genuine threat to the stability of the monarchy or the state. The institution is stronger than any individual secret. Camilla looked hopeful for the first time since entering the conference room. So you understand why this information needs to be preserved and why it needs to be handled the right way. Patricia sat down across from Camilla, her expression serious. I understand your reasoning and I believe you're being honest about your intentions. However, Marcus and I need a moment to discuss this privately. Would you mind waiting outside? I'll have an officer escort you to a comfortable waiting area. Camilla nodded and stood, smoothing her coat. As she reached the door, she turned back. Whatever you decide, thank you for taking the time to understand rather than simply following the easiest path. That takes courage. After Camilla left, escorted by a junior security officer, Patricia and Marcus sat in heavy silence. Finally, Patricia spoke. Marcus, you made this discovery. You're the one who insisted on checking the bag when you could have let it slide. This decision should be partly yours. What do you think we should do? Marcus had been dreading this question. His entire career had been built on following protocols and trusting the system. But he had also joined the Royal Protection Unit because he believed the monarchy represented something important, connection to history and tradition that gave the nation stability and identity. Now he was being asked to protect that institution in a way that went against standard procedures. He thought about the letters he had read, about the Queen's loneliness and Thomas's quiet dignity. He thought about the current king, who had learned the truth about his parentage in his 70s and had chosen to honor it in a way that balanced truth with responsibility. He thought about his own daughter and the world she would inherit, a world where truth and integrity mattered. Finally, Marcus spoke. "I think we should let her go to Paris, but with conditions." Patricia leaned forward, interested in what Marcus was thinking. What kind of conditions? Marcus had been formulating a plan while they reviewed the materials. "First, we make copies of everything on that USB drive right now, storing them in our own secure system. That way, if something happens to the originals, the information isn't lost. Second, we require Dr. Ashworth to sign an additional agreement, one that includes notification requirements to British authorities before any publication or public disclosure. Third, we document everything that happened here today in a sealed report that goes to the highest levels of security services, giving them full awareness without requiring immediate action." Patricia nodded slowly, clearly considering the proposal. That could work. It creates accountability and oversight without preventing the historical preservation that seems to be genuinely important. But there's one more condition I would add. We need a direct line of communication with someone at the palace who can verify decisions and provide guidance if situations develop. "We can't be making these calls in isolation," Marcus agreed. The plan was taking shape, a compromise that balanced duty with discretion, protocol with pragmatism. Patricia made another phone call, this one longer and more detailed than the previous ones. She explained the situation to someone Marcus assumed was very highly placed in the security apparatus. The conversation was professional but intense, with Patricia fielding difficult questions and providing thoughtful answers. When she finally ended the call, Patricia looked exhausted but determined. "We have authorization to proceed with our plan with one modification. The copies we make must be stored not just in our system but also delivered to the royal household's official historian. That creates a second verified record and ensures that if Dr. Ashworth's copies are somehow compromised, the materials remain available for proper historical documentation." Marcus felt relief wash over him. They had found a path forward that seemed to satisfy everyone's legitimate interests. They brought Camilla back into the conference room and explained their decision. Her reaction was immediate and emotional. Tears streamed down her face as she thanked them repeatedly. "You don't understand how important this is," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "The Queen wanted so desperately for Thomas to be remembered, for their story to be known eventually. She felt guilty every day that he had given up so much and received no recognition. This way, someday people will understand the sacrifice both of them made." The next hour was spent implementing their plan. Marcus carefully created encrypted copies of all the materials, while Patricia drafted the official documentation. They contacted Dr. Ashworth in Paris, who participated in a video conference and signed the additional agreement without hesitation. She seemed genuinely honored to be entrusted with such important historical materials and understood completely the sensitive nature of her responsibility. Marcus arranged for a secure courier to deliver copies to the palace historian, a process that involved multiple layers of verification and security protocols. By the time everything was completed, it was early evening. Camilla's flight had long since departed without her, but arrangements were made for a later departure on a different aircraft. Before Camilla left the secure area, she asked to speak with Marcus privately. Patricia stepped outside, giving them a moment alone. Camilla looked at Marcus with sincere gratitude. "You could have simply followed the rules and made this much harder than it needed to be. Why did you choose to help?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Because sometimes doing the right thing means understanding the spirit of the rules, not just the letter. My job is to protect the monarchy and the people who represent it. Today, I think I did that by protecting a story that deserves to be told, even if that story complicates the simple narrative we've all believed." Camilla reached into her bag and pulled out one of the photographs, a duplicate that hadn't been mentioned before. It showed Thomas Whitmore in his military uniform, young and handsome, his eyes full of life and hope. She handed it to Marcus. "Keep this. Remember that behind every institution, every tradition, every historical narrative, there are real people making impossible choices. Thomas was a genuine hero, not just in war but in how he lived his entire life after making the hardest decision imaginable." Marcus took the photograph, knowing he would treasure it. It would serve as a reminder of the day he learned that truth was more complex than he had ever imagined. That honor sometimes required flexibility rather than rigidity, and that protecting what mattered most sometimes meant acting in ways that seemed to contradict established procedures. After Camilla departed for Paris, Marcus and Patricia sat together in the now quiet conference room. The weight of what they had learned and the decisions they had made pressed down on both of them. Patricia broke the silence first. "Do you think we made the right choice?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He thought about the letters he had read, about the love story that had unfolded across decades despite impossible circumstances. He thought about the current king, who had learned a difficult truth about his parentage and had chosen to honor it with grace and wisdom. He thought about Thomas Whitmore, who had lived a quiet life in Canada, carrying a secret that could have made him famous, but choosing dignity and discretion instead. "I think we made the human choice," Marcus finally said. "The rules exist to protect what matters. Today, what mattered was preserving a truth that deserves to be known eventually, in the right way, at the right time. We created accountability and oversight while allowing that process to move forward. That feels right to me." Patricia nodded in agreement. "I've been in security work for 30 years. I've seen a lot of situations where the technically correct response would have caused more harm than good. This was one of those situations. We'll document everything properly, maintain the chain of custody on our copies, and let the process unfold as it should." They spent another hour completing their official reports, ensuring that every detail was recorded accurately. The documents were marked with the highest security classification and routed through appropriate channels. Marcus knew that somewhere, very high up in the government and royal household, people would read these reports and make their own assessments about the situation. When Marcus finally drove home that night, hours later than expected, his mind was still processing everything that had happened. His wife was waiting up for him, concerned about his late arrival. He couldn't tell her the details, of course, but he hugged her tightly and told her that he loved her. She looked at him with confusion and concern, sensing that something significant had happened, but knowing better than to press for information about his work. Later that night, unable to sleep, Marcus sat in his study and looked at the photograph Camilla had given him. Thomas Whitmore stared out from the image, frozen in time, young and unaware of the extraordinary life that awaited him. Marcus wondered what Thomas had thought about during his years in Canada. Had he followed news about the royal family closely? Had he felt pride watching his son grow up, even from a distance? Had he ever regretted his choice? The letters suggested that Thomas had found peace with his decision. He had married, raised a family, lived what appeared to be a good life. But Marcus suspected there must have been moments of profound sadness. Times when Thomas had wondered what might have been if circumstances had been different. The sacrifice he made was absolute and irreversible, and that kind of sacrifice had to leave marks on a person's soul. Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself thinking often about that day at the airport. He read extensively about the period in question, trying to understand the context better. He learned about the fragility of the monarchy in the post-war period, the intense public scrutiny that surrounded the royal family, the political pressures that influenced every decision. The more he learned, the more he understood why the secret had been kept and why it had been maintained for so long. 3 months after the incident, Marcus received a private letter delivered through secure channels. It was from the king himself, handwritten on official stationery. The letter thanked Marcus for his discretion and professionalism in handling a delicate situation. It acknowledged the difficult position Marcus had been placed in and expressed appreciation for the wisdom he had shown in finding a balanced solution. The letter went on to say something that deeply moved Marcus. The king wrote that he had spent much of his life wondering about certain aspects of his childhood, certain feelings and impressions that had never quite made sense. Learning the truth about his father had been initially shocking, but ultimately liberating. It had answered questions he hadn't even known he was asking. And knowing that the truth would eventually be told properly, with full context and understanding, gave him peace. Marcus kept that letter in a locked drawer in his study, taking it out occasionally when he needed reminding that his work mattered, that the choices he made had real impact on real people's lives. He never showed it to anyone, not even his wife. understanding that it was a private communication that needed to remain confidential. Patricia also seemed changed by the experience. She and Marcus developed a deeper professional relationship, built on mutual respect and shared understanding of how complex security work could be. They never spoke about the incident directly, even in private. But there was an unspoken acknowledgement between them that they had handled something important together and had done so with integrity. Years later, when Marcus was close to retirement, he learned that Dr. Ashworth had indeed kept the materials secure and had begun preliminary work on what would eventually become a comprehensive historical account. She was working carefully with input from royal historians and constitutional experts, ensuring that the story would be told with appropriate context and sensitivity. Marcus knew he might not live to see the day when the full story became public. The 15-year waiting period Camilla had mentioned, plus the time needed for proper historical research and writing, meant that publication was still years away. But he took comfort in knowing that the truth would eventually emerge, that Thomas Whitmore's sacrifice would be acknowledged, and that the love story between him and the Queen would be understood as a testament to duty, honor, and the complicated choices real people make in extraordinary circumstances. On Marcus's last day of work before retirement, Patricia organized a small private ceremony in his honor. Among the commendations and thank you speeches, she made a comment that only the two of them fully understood. She said that Marcus had exemplified the highest ideals of service by understanding that protecting the institution sometimes meant protecting the truth, even when that truth was complicated and challenging. As Marcus drove away from Heathrow Airport for the final time as an employee, he thought about that afternoon years earlier when a routine security check had become something much more significant. He thought about the trust that had been placed in him, the responsibility he had carried since that day, and the knowledge that would remain locked in his heart until the day it was finally appropriate to share. He also thought about Thomas Whitmore and the Queen, two people who had loved each other deeply but had chosen duty over personal happiness. Their story would eventually be told, their sacrifice acknowledged, and their love remembered. And Marcus had played a small but crucial role in making sure that happened properly. As he pulled into his driveway and saw his wife waiting at the door to greet him, Marcus felt profound gratitude for having been given the opportunity to serve with integrity and to make choices that honored both the institution he had protected and the human truths that gave that institution its deepest meaning.